Okay, so this is Team A saying that Jesus is God in contradiction to Jehovah's Witnesses or those who believe that Jesus is not God. So Team A, first argument would be Mark chapter 2, where Jesus not only forgives somebody's sins, which is only something that God can do, but he then heals somebody. Number 2, in Luke chapter 9, Jesus transfigures before his disciples. He goes up on a mountain, his face starts to shine brightly, and a cloud seems to exude out of him, right? And God is associated with a cloud. And the third argument would be where God calms storms in Psalm 107, and Jesus does that exact same thing. And that's suggesting that Jesus is God, and also that he's more powerful than Zeus, which the Greeks and the Romans would have seen as in control of the weather, in control of the heavens. So Jesus is God. That's my opening statement.
Okay, so this is Team B opening statement, suggesting that Jesus is not divine. Either he is a human or he's an angelic being, but he is not God himself. The first argument will be John chapter 14, verse 28, where Jesus says, quote, "The Father is greater than I," unquote. So that's implying that God is different from Jesus and God is greater than Jesus, right? So Jesus is not God. Second argument is going to be that Mark chapter 13, verse 32, where Jesus says that he does not know the end of the world. Only God the Father knows the end of the world. That implies that Jesus is not divine, that God knows something that he does not know. So Jesus obviously is not God. He's human like us. Third argument, in John chapter 20, verse 17, Jesus speaks of, quote, "my God and your God," close quote. That's implying that God is separate from Jesus. Jesus refers to God and specifies that he is different from himself. So Jesus is not divine, and that is my conclusion.
All right, so this is my rebuttal for Team A, saying that Jesus is God. For the first point, my opponent argued from John chapter 14, where Jesus says that the Father is greater than I, seeming to imply that God is different than Jesus. However, Jesus is fully man. He's fully God and fully man. So if Jesus is fully man, he can speak from a human vantage point and say that God is greater than his humanity. Right? That is true, technically speaking. The second point, in Mark chapter 13, Jesus speaks of how he does not know the end of the world. He doesn't know when that is going to occur, and only God knows, only God the Father knows. However, that's actually a typical Jewish idiom, where to know, quote unquote, means to tell. So if it means to tell, then that means when Jesus says that he does not know the end of the world, he's actually saying he knows the end of the world, he just is not going to tell us when the end of the world is. So there's actually no meaning here that Jesus doesn't know the end of the world, but God does. No, Jesus does know. He's just not going to tell us. Finally, the third point for this rebuttal is my opponent cited John chapter 20, where Jesus speaks of God as separate from himself. He refers to my God and your God. That doesn't actually indicate, though, that Jesus is not God, because Jesus is fully man, so he can speak from his human nature and speak of God as separate from his human nature, because his humanity, if he's man, is different from his divinity, godliness. So that is my rebuttal.
All right, so this is Team B rebuttal. My opponent said that Jesus is divine because he forgives sins, implying that Jesus is God himself forgiving sins. However, what if Jesus was just proclaiming God's forgiveness and he was not God himself forgiving their sins? Number 2, my opponent said that Jesus was transfigured. He revealed his true divinity on the mountain when his face shone like the sun. However, what if God was just working a miracle through Jesus as he had done previously through different Old Testament prophets? And then number 3, Jesus calmed the storm. My opponent says that Jesus is divine because he calmed a storm. However, my response to that would be, again, God just worked a miracle through Jesus, not that he was divine itself. That is my conclusion.